you to check them out and register if you feel inclined, because they're not going to be around forever. So today's free community webinar is exploring the 12th house, and demystifying at the 12th house is probably one of the most misunderstood corners of our chart. It is commonly associated with the rather ominous attributes such as self-undoing, addictions, or confined places. But in truth, it represents some of our deepest essences and primal needs. Understanding the 12th house can provide a whole new perspective on the natal chart and the person's evolutionary journey. This is an exciting time to really explore the 12th house and the quote unquote mysteries involved, especially as we're getting deeper into this time of isolation and introspection. And now to introduce Maurice. He is the author of the books Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces, and Astrology and the Evolution of Consciousness, Volume 1. He's a leading evolutionary astrology consultant and teacher with a worldwide practice spanning close to 3 decades. Maurice currently serves as the president of the Organization of Professional Astrology, which offers pioneering programs for astrologers. He is based in Arizona and directs a 2-year online professional diploma program with students from across the world. Now, a couple of notes about Maurice. He just joined the Kepler faculty and is going to be offering a 10-week evolutionary class in the fall. Now, the fall is a little bit of time from now, but I will say that this is a great introduction now to start thinking about, okay, do I want to jump into this evolutionary track? Evolutionary astrology is not only fascinating, but it can help you understand your soul's potential and the potential of the collective as well. And Maurice is an excellent teacher to be offering this. So we're very excited to have him. I also want to thank him for donating his time to this community service webinar. This webinar helps Kepler College raise much needed scholarship funds. I also want to thank attendees for your donations. And if you haven't yet donated and you're able to do so, please click on the donate button on the website. Remember that Kepler College is a 501c3 charity, and your donations from the US are tax deductible. On a side note, if you're strapped and can't really make a full donation now, any purchase you make through Amazon, you can choose Kepler College of Astrological Arts and Sciences as your smile cherry of choice. When you do this, Amazon donates a percentage of your book purchases to Kepler College. So without further ado, I want to introduce Maurice, and again, we're very excited to have him today. So Maurice, I'm going to pass the ball to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Callan. Exciting times for sure, and I hope this presentation will shed light not just on the chart itself, but also on, like you say, some of the things we're going through right now. I will share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. If you can
there we go, we've got it.
Great. So why the 12th house? What brings me to discuss this subject? First of all, I can say, well, I wrote a book about it, and I really feel inspired by this material because I think, like some of the description of the topic says, that it is often misinterpreted. And even if we understand some general dynamics, it's hard to make full sense of it. And what I found is that really the 12th house operates maybe on a completely different dimension. It is a portal to something that is beyond the material in the references that we used to and that we can use through the other 11 houses. So there's something indeed purposefully mystifying, purposefully mysterious, and yet if we understand it, we can definitely make the best of it and demystify it in a good way, not in a cynical way. So one of the aspects of the book, you can see I do combine the 12th house thematically with the sign of Pisces, and I associate with the planet Neptune. Obviously, Jupiter plays a role in it as well. My main focus is on the influence of Neptune. And the reason is not so much that, you know, house sign and planets are exactly the same thing. We know there's a difference between them. But what I want to basically address is that there is an archetypal connection. And each of these house, sign, and planet play a different role to activate a similar theme, which we are going to explore today. And you know, as Callan was mentioning, we're experiencing this current circumstances with coronavirus that has us really be in a place where we suddenly are not in control of our own movements or of our own lives. And I do attribute that to the transit of Neptune in Pisces as well. We're going to understand how that ties into it. But just think of the fact that Pisces is the sign that doesn't have boundaries to begin with, that unifies everybody. So in a very quick fashion, we all, you know, for better and worse, this virus disregarded culture, borders, age, and geographical placements, and put us all on this same platform, basically. Even if some people are more vulnerable than others, we're still all responding and facing the same concerns and limitations. So there's something about Neptune in Pisces that removes all the differences, all the our sense of individuality, and reminds us, in fact, that, you know, the borders are very porous, so to speak. And that is one of the problem with Neptune, is contagion. So I just want to, you know, highlight the fact, you know, some people may feel it's awkward to tie the house and signs, but I do find it in my practice that it proves to be very reliable, in the sense that you can experience similar themes that associated with the 12th house that you may also experience with Neptune placements and Pisces placements. And we'll look at that. I mean, let's be open-minded. I think that's the beginning of any learning experience. This is the diploma course that Kaylin was referring to. If you're interested, just go to the website. And I also want to plug in our upcoming event with OPA. We're migrating our astrology retreat online because of the current circumstances. So you can join from wherever you are. The way it works is you have 10 tracks. You choose one track. You see the list of tracks here. And then
Maurice,
everybody,
I think you need to move your dashboard. It's covering the screen.
is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
So that's where you can join a track and there's an immersion, and then also join these shorter lectures where everyone can attend them together. So go to the OPA website, opaastrology.org, and the theme of the conference is Bridging Science and Spirituality, but it really covers so many different aspects of astrology study. So to the 12th house, why do I focus on it personally? It's really, I don't even know myself. I started to write material about the 12th house in a very spontaneous way when Jupiter at the time was transiting my 12th house. So I started to make certain connections that seemed very intriguing, and that developed into a whole body of knowledge that was later published in the book. I find it very fascinating because it operates on such different laws and different principles. And I think it's always something that people are curious about, because there is a sense of confusion about the 12th house. It represents confusion and it creates confusion. Now, in order to understand anything in astrology, I personally like to look at the natural order of the wheel. You know, the traditional sequence of the signs. And we look at the eastern horizon, which is a natural beginning, and we realize that the ascendant really, or this Aries point, is on the one hand the beginning, but what direction do we go? You know, there's a primary direction and there's a secondary direction. The first one is the fact that every day and every moment, planets rise on the horizon, on the eastern horizon, which is what the ascendant represents. But they don't rise in the first house, they rise in the 12th house. So we usually begin our day with the sunlight in the 12th house. So there must be something more than prisons and, you know, something that is confining and isolating, since it's actually the first rays of light and the beginning of activity and actually wake time. So just that is an important reminder that there's more perhaps to that 12th house. Then the secondary direction is the fact that even though the planets rise in the 12th house, it's because the Earth rotates faster, you know, in the course of a day. So the natural movement is from Aries to Taurus to Gemini and so forth. Just takes longer. It's like, you know, the effect of riding a train, and one train goes faster than the other. It appears as though the other train goes backwards, when in fact they're going in the same direction. So understanding this natural order, the ascendant is one of the most important points, because it is a birthing point. It is, excuse me, a beginning of sorts. But as I said, the beginning lands in two different houses. It lands both in the first and in the 12th. And I often see in that context that the 12th house is both the beginning and the ending of our process. If we look at the wheel of the zodiac and every planet, what is astrology? You know, we're looking at cycles and a new moon to new moon and Saturn Pluto conjunction to another. It's basically a study of those planetary cycles and how they affect our own personal cycles. So if we go through the signs and we complete our process in the 12th, then the 12th leads to the first again. So there's some preparation in the 12th house towards the first house. Now we can, you know, I'm an evolutionary astrologer, so the process of growth and evolution and consciousness is very primal reference to my approach and analysis of astrology. And so in my understanding, we're not just going in circles through the 12 sign, you know, from Pisces and back to Aries and then another round through the zodiac. Are we chasing our tail? Are we going in circles? Or is it a spiral effect that cannot be seen on a two-dimensional flat chart? Are we actually going through a new cycle, but on a higher vibration and higher frequency? That's a good question. Or in a downward spiral, which is not necessarily a, you know, a negative thing, as we may sound. So I want to, you know, to get to the better understanding of these archetypes. I trust that natural order, the fact that why is Pisces before Aries and why is it after Aquarius? What is in that sequence? Is there a thread? Because that's what I like to do in a very holistic way, is to understand that everything is interconnected. You know, Capricorn doesn't live just in Capricorn. Capricorn is opposing Cancer. Capricorn squares Aries, and the same for the 12th house. The 12th house opposes the 6th house, sandwiched between the 11th and the 1st. And what does that mean? How do we learn from it in relation to its environment? So what happens in the 1st house? Let's start with that. One of the things we talk about is the birthing process. Now, the 1st house, and if we relate to the Aries energy, as a fire principle. Now, everything you have in the 1st house from this perspective has to do with what you're birthing into your life, what you're bringing, what you're creating. It's that ability to really manifest. And you are now taking control the same way a baby separates from the womb of its mother and becomes an autonomous being and start to deliver, have desires and intentions, and becomes basically an active force of life. And all the fire principles, fire signs, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, resonate with that. So what is in the fire signs? It's important to understand that the fire element, you know, mythologically is one of the elements that is last to appear. You know, Prometheus had to fight for the fire to deliver it to the humans. He had to fight Jupiter, actually. But that changed the course of the world, because one of the things that fire gave to people was not just heat and light, but it gives them power. And that was one of the reasons why it was so, you know, jealously kept, is fire can be misused. Fire is powerful. Fire is energy. And so if you have access to that, you become autonomous. You don't need the gods anymore. You become yourself a creator. You know, we know the sun, and Leo is the sign of creativity and birthing children. So Aries is our own ignition. It's our own birth, whereas Leo is what we birth ourselves. So how we ignite others. And then Jupiter, you know, is the grandchildren. And in that sense, it has to do with the expansion principle, when you go beyond yourself, and when whatever you do reaches larger numbers. What is the fundamental connection to the fire sign? The fire sign make you a participant of life. You become an active force. You're not just witnessing. You're not just driftwood, you know, going down the stream. Excuse me. So there's something about the fire that makes you, as you become an active force, you also start to change things. You modify, you touch, you create, you make decisions about the way life is going to go. And in some ways, you become a co-creator with the larger forces, which is what we're talking about when we refer to Neptune and the 12th house. So if we speak about the first house being that ignition and that separation process into individuality, let's remember that what makes us individuals separate from each other is time and space. Saturn squares the first house. Saturn, you know, represents time. Capricorn squares Aries. And there's something about time that basically compartmentalizes the whole of life. You know, we are now in a workshop. Next, we're going to have lunch. Next, we're going to do something else. Every time is dedicated to a certain activity. Even our astrology chart is defined by time and space. And that's what makes us unique. No chart is ever the same. So it's our individual connection, our individual identity, which starts with that separation of the first house. But at the same time, if we look at the 12th house, then we see that the 12th house represents what came before birth. That's why in some other astrology circles, we refer to the 12th house as the past life or karma, because that's what came before we were born. That's the residue, the end product of the last cycle. And there's a lot to that. But I also refer to that 12th house as a preparation phase. And I would refer to it as the womb before we are actually birthed. And it's not just our mother's womb, it's the universal womb. It is basically what happens before separation, before our birth. The same way the baby is completely dependent on its mother in order to be fed, in order to be protected, and so forth. In the 12th house, we are sheltered by the great universe. And that's why we basically see what came before us in the 12th house. And I mean, not just on a personal Maurice level, but on a humanity level. We did not create this planet. So what created it? We're born into an already existing mechanism and reality. You know, the trees are already there, there's oxygen, there's rain, there's food. We have all the resources already established and available, and we're just born into a reality that is existing, and we're entering it and then exiting it as components of it. But we did not create it. And that's very much the same way that we are not creating our own, we didn't create the whole universe ourselves. So through the 12th house, we get in touch with the larger forces that are beyond our ego, beyond our control, beyond our own understanding. That's why there's a mystery to it to begin with, because despite Darwin and despite Moses and despite all the scriptures and all the accounts we have on the origins of life, we really are only speculating. Where did it all start? And where are we actually going? We don't really know. We don't really know what's the purpose. We can have opinions about it, but there's nothing confirmed. So what I'm saying is we are born into the moment not knowing really what the source is and what the final purpose is. We only do with what we have, with what's in front of us. And there's something about the 12th house that takes us, again, beyond rational, mental references to a place where we are at the mercy and we are under the protection of higher forces. Now, why do I say protection? How do I know that these universal forces are not going to devour me and basically be malefic in nature? I mean, there's a lot of challenge and difficulty in life, accidents, diseases, predators, but the fact that we're still here and that we didn't die and that we prevailed just means that there's something that is working, that we are doing something right, and we're cooperating with these larger forces. So there's something that we can derive from the fact that we're here. And like I say, if I compare that to a child and its mother, and compare that to ourselves as a species and a greater universal womb, I can see how I'm born into a reality that's already at the right temperature, the right amount of oxygen, the right amount of light, and the right amount of nutrients. Everything is provided. I don't need to create what will sustain me. It's already in place. And that's why in the 12th house, there's an element of surrendering, because you are not in charge. It's not up to you. There are larger universal forces, but also these forces can translate into forces of nature. So what are these forces? Some will call it the creator, God. Some will call it hurricanes, fate. Fate is very much a 12th house experience, because it's not up to you. It's something that's larger than you. Your own destiny is not completely according to your own terms from that perspective. Now tell that to Mars. What do you mean I'm not in charge of my destiny? Tell that to the Sun, tell that to Jupiter. They're not going to like it, because the fire energy is about creating your own destiny. It's about being the manifestors. So suddenly being in a place where you don't make decisions and it's not up to you can be intimidating and even infuriating. But at the same time, when you wake up every morning and you see the sun rose, and nobody, turned a some kind of mechanism to lift the sun, and it's just there. It shows up. It's part of where you're born into, and you don't need to worry about it. At least not yet. So like I said, there are many things in our lives that we don't even know, that we don't even think about, that are automatically happening, and we're not even conscious of it. We take them for granted. We take for granted that we have enough air to breathe, that the sky is blue, that we're standing vertical and not on four. Many things are basically a result of many actions, a result of many forces. And maybe that's part of what the 12th house is the fusion of everything. And what is the result of that? So if Mars is mine and what I do and where I'm going, and that first house is the impulse to become, the 12th house is what is the fusion of all forces, and how the collective and that dissolving of self merges into something that is all-encompassing, including everything that lives, vegetal, spiritual, animal, and so forth. So it's how the sum of everything comes together. That's why I was referring to Neptune in Pisces transit, in the current time, causing this pandemic that crosses all borders, and suddenly our individuality does not matter because everybody's touched, everybody's vulnerable, and we're all one in this crisis. So there's a resonance to that. So the 12th house has to do with the passive principle, with accepting things as they are because we can't change them. I cannot make the sun rise at a different time if I like it or not, and make the sky another color. These are facts that are beyond me, and I'm just adjusting to them. And that's part of what the 12th house is about, is what in life you need to accept because you need to adapt to something that you didn't create, something that is not of your own making. And maybe some of these decisions are made for you, for better and worse. Some people can feel protected by that. Some people can feel anxious about it. Ask the Virgos opposing Pisces. Those 6th house people can see that 12th house as completely, like a Russian roulette, like a loose cannon. We don't know what's going to come out of that 12th house. It's unpredictable. And from a 6th house point of view, I definitely want to be prepared. So what happens from the, in the sequence of event? I ignite my individuality, my consciousness in the 1st house, and I start, and I find my source of energy. Just like you ignite a car, you're awake. You wake up in the 1st house. Just like the 12th house is sleeping, the 1st house is opening your eyes to life. And yet, there are many layers to that, as we talked about. The sun rises in the 12th. But if we go according to that traditional order, we go from the 1st house, the self and the ignition, the 2nd house, sustainability. What do I have to carry me through time, to hold me, to feed me, to nourish me financially, and food and safety in general. Then Third house, has to do with your navigation and learning processes. And so you build yourself that way until you reach Virgo. And Virgo has to do with, as an earth sign, it has to do with your skill set, with what you've mastered as an individual. So through Virgo, you become autonomous. You can find cures for diseases, heal yourself without needing to kneel down and pray. You have something that you know about that can help you alleviate your pain. It's also the house of work, the sixth house, and the Virgo has to do with the work that you perform because you're able to, you have skills. So there's a lot of mastery, self-mastery in Virgo. And what we have from the first to the sixth house is a complete development. It's the end of the lower hemisphere, and you're getting ready to pierce through the upper hemisphere, through the seventh house. So there's, you build your autonomy. The sixth house is the house of routine and function and health. So you stay, you go to the gym to stay healthy, you do your yoga, you take your supplements, you maintain your life, and you have a profession, you produce. Virgo is the harvest. That's the sign of the collecting, the fruits of your labor. What you have in Virgo, if we bring the context of Pisces, 6th, 12th house, what you have with it is the need to control in order to be able to have some level of predictability in your life. If Virgo is routine, what is your routine? Routine is something that works for you. You wake up at a certain time, you do your own breakfast because you know that this works for you. You gotta go into your car and you know where to drive and you know what to do. You're in charge. So there's a level of predictability. You build a schedule. You know that at 1 p.m. there's a talk that I have to attend, and you structure your life accordingly. So in some ways, that's where you're in charge, is the sixth house, is what you deliver through it's the end of your personal process, the end of that lower wheel. Through the sixth house is what, and it's the sixth house and Virgo have to do with service. So it's what you give, what you deliver, what you perform. It's your job. It's your job. It's not just a job to pay the bills. It's the job that you perform in the bigger scheme of things. Remember, mutable signs, mutable houses, Caden houses relate to what you bring back to the collective. So the cardinal is my identity, and then the fixed houses are about your production, and the Caden house, the mutable houses, are about what you release. So in Virgo, it's the service you give back to the world, to your people. And so there's a level of mastery up to that point because you're ready, you're a functional individual. So that's why the 12th house opposes the 6th house. The 6th house is what is up to you. And the 12th house is not what is not up to you, what is larger than you, what you need to trust. Just like you trust the sun will rise, even though you have no control over that. But the 6th house is about, it's up to me to show up on time at work. It's up to me to cook the food at the right temperature. It's up to me to have my slides ready for this presentation. And that's, you know, that tension that exists between the 12th and the 6th. So here's an illustration, you know, in a way capturing this dichotomy, what is in my control and what isn't. So we're soon going to take questions. I just want to establish some facts and we'll get there. And that's another slide I like to use to capture those energies. So Virgo, you know, is about taming. It's about the intervention. It's about the aesthetics that help you be in charge. The way you want to regulate the resources. So you have a whole jungle. Can you live in a jungle? It's wild, you know, it's untamed, it's dangerous. There are many creatures that you have to be careful about. And so what you do with the 6th house is you get the manicure, you wear clothes, you cover your head with a hat in order not to get a sunburn, and you channel resources in order to make things more productive for you, the same way you would clear space to build a house, clear the forest to build a field and plant oranges, whatever. Right now, with Neptune in Pisces, we see, you know, the decline of these virginal wild places. You know, how the Amazon is burning and how we are overdoing the Virgo. We're over taming, you know, the wildlife is going extinct. There's less habitat. Agriculture is taking over everything. So there's a crisis in the Pisces domain where all the natural things that are, you know, that were here prior to us are starting to erode or disappear. So going back to our natural wheel, we eventually, you know, step into the 3rd quadrant, which is where we form relationships, and we realize that even though we are so good at what we do, we need help. So the 3rd quadrant, 7, 8, 9 houses are the houses of personal lack and the need to connect with others in order to compensate for what we don't have and to transform and grow and expand. And we reach the 9th house, you know, that Jupiterian theme of maximum, greater potential, expansion. And that's the last fire house before we get into the last 4th quarter. So from 1st to 9, we complete the fire, and that's also the end of our autonomy. It's the end of our of being in charge of our destiny. Then comes Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces, which are the impersonal signs that prompt you to adapt to a larger force. Through Capricorn, you adapt to a system, to an authority, to a higher order. And Aquarius, you continue to build on that. And the 12th house is when you're not just connecting to the higher forces of society, but to the higher forces of life, of the everything. So what happens in a way from house 1st to house 11 is that you keep building yourself first, and then you form relationship to get stronger, and you increase your resources through the 8th house, and you reach, you know, new territories, new land, new markets through the 9th house. And in the 10th house, you start to connect to a higher social order. You become accountable to a larger society, and you adapt to that. And in the 11th house, you know, that's when the society works as a team. How we create a civilization. You know, Aquarius is the sign of advancement, of progress, of civilization, of moving away from the caves and building airplanes. Higher inspiration, vision for the future. But it's the sign of engineering, it's the sign of science. It's where humans have reached their really greater maximum, not as individuals, but as a group, as a collective. That's why Aquarius 11th house relate to friends and groups and to organizations, because we work as teams, and together we bring our genius to advance life, to advance civilization. And up to that point, it seems like we've done our work. Like, what else do we need? We are going to space. We are finding cure for diseases. We are the masters of our own world. You know, we're on top of the food chain. and you know, Aquarius opposes Leo, 5th and 11th houses, and Aquarius relates to the human brain, to the intelligence, to the ability to elevate, to go up in the sky, the same way branches of a tree go up in the heavens. Whereas, you know, the tree grows equally deep into the earth as high as it goes up in the sky. So it seems like the work is done. You know, we can keep evolving and spiraling up and create better hospitals and faster cars and develop humanitarian rights and improve the quality of life. That's what Aquarius wants to do, is improve the quality of life through advancements. And then we go back to the 12th house. And in the 12th house, we complete that cycle. But as a Caden house, it's again where we release the fruits of our complete work as individual and as a collective. Now think about the fact that through the 12th house, you were born into that universal womb. You were everything. You're part of the whole. And so when you complete that circle and you go back to the 12, that's when you remember that all the things you created are not yours. You don't own the fruits of your labor. You can use them, but you don't own any land. Land is not really yours. You own a house, but is it really, like, can you own the earth? No. Do you own your children? No. Do I own this astrology knowledge? No. Do I own the electricity if I'm an electrician? I don't. So through the 12th house, I realized that all my skills and all the things I've built on and developed return to the collective. And the 12th house relates to all the things we cannot own. because they belong to everybody and therefore to nobody. Just like the sun doesn't belong to a person yet. We know that's changing with capitalism. But in essence, you know, the 12th house is the sign, is that part of the zodiac where I can access that portal to losing myself or surrendering myself to the greater collective cause. This is why I associate the 12th house also with service and profession, completing the 6th house axis. So both 6th and 12th house are houses where we provide a service to the greater whole. And when we will look at charts to kind of identify that. But keep in mind that, you know, what's the difference then between the 6th and the 12th? From a professional point of view, the 6th is how you get ready for work and how you develop your skills to perform. Whereas the 12th house relates to how the public responds to what you're giving. It's where you can enter the collective consciousness and provide something that people can resonate with. For example, you will see many artists with Mars or Sun in the 12th house because their performance, Sun, their creativity, Sun, their action and impulses and creativity, Mars, can touch the masses. And I'll give you some examples. You know, if we look at David Bowie, he has a Sun and Mars in the 12th, and I'm cherry picking here, of course, but you will see it consistently. You know, he's not hiding anywhere. He's a very public person. And that's something that the 12th house can be. Now, why do we relate the 12th house to some of these definitions? Secret enemies, karma, hospital, prisons, and confined places, behind the scenes, the unconscious. One word that, or one concept that unify all these different definitions is that the 12th house is a place where you don't have control. When you're unconscious, you don't have control. When you sleep, you relinquish control. When you're in a hospital or a prison, somebody has control over you. You lose yourself. Secret enemy, you're not aware of what's going on. So, you know, if we use that analogy, that's very much what the 12th house can be. This humongous, larger force, and you are a tiny little presence, barely making a difference. But you can surf those waves, and if you manage to surf the waves, you'll go very far. But if you fight the wave, you'll drown. That's part of the 12th house message is, if you fight the larger forces, you're never gonna win. You have to cooperate with the wave and ride it. And it's very humbling. Another example of, you know, a very Che Guevara, you probably know a little bit about him, this revolutionary warrior who wanted to bring social justice to South America and the world. advancing his cause of communism. What do we see? A packed 12th house, including Mars-Uranus, the revolutionary, including a moon in Pisces in the 12th. So this is someone who had a collective vision, and he was willing to fight Mars for that larger cause. It's part of the service. It's part of his sense of identification. And he was born, in a relatively wealthy family. He was trained to be a doctor, if I'm not mistaken. So you see the comforts of Taurus and the privileges of an established and stable early life. But with the moon and Mars in Pisces, he could not just separate himself and live in socioeconomic classes. The need to homogenize, to share the Taurus resources with everybody, moon in the 12th, was part of his motivation. And of course, the downfall was that he was eventually shot and killed, which is the downside of Mars in the 12th, because you can be a spiritual warrior, but then Mars in the 12th can also be overpowered by larger forces. We're going to touch on that. Now look at another example of a moon in the 12th house in Sagittarius. Rupert Murdoch is, one of the big media mogul. He owns, Fox and all the newspapers, around the world. He is a massive force in our culture. Now, is a moon in Sagittarius showing that he is actually disseminating, and touching our minds and education and knowledge. Sagittarius is a sign of broadcasting. It's the sign of sharing, of proselytizing in some ways. So, teaching your truth. So there's something about that moon in the 12th in Sag that he can reach everybody. So the 12th house is not just isolating. Actually, it's the place where you cannot hide, because you are everybody, you are everywhere, you are everything. And you lose yourself in the 12th, or you touch everybody in the 12th. So of course it can be the undoing of self, because your ego dissolves there. But it can also be the place where your ego serves, touches the larger whole. And through his moon here, he's doing it through his media empire. And all that squares his Pisces planets. So he's very Piscean, 12th Houseian. Excuse me. And of course, there's a lot of controversy, as you would have with someone with Saturn, Pluto, Mars opposition, a lot of power plays, and what is he doing with that power? Is he using it well? Another debate. So some of the stages of development that you can see in the 12th house are starting with that innocence, that place where you're bare, where you are opening yourself to like a baby in the womb. You have no protection. The sheltering sky is taking care of you. You trust the heavens. You trust that there's something out there that's good. And then you lose your innocence because you need to be developing your immune system. You can't expect God to do everything for you. So that's where you enter the first house and you enter the need to fight. Just like the turtles hatching the eggs and running. Have you seen that footage where, you know, you have this massive birth hatching of the turtles and they all rush to the ocean and they're picked by predators and, you know, they face many danger until they finally, you know, reach the waters and then they pass the sharks and they're able to start their lives. So that's a loss of innocence, where you suddenly wake up to the fact that you could be eaten, that you could get a sunburn, that you could eat the wrong thing. And if you're not careful, you're going to be preyed upon. Now think of the 12th house. You're not in control. What's the greatest fear? The greatest fear is that you won't have any means to defend yourself if there's a problem. So you don't have defenses in the 12th house. Your only defense is the larger force. It's God. So if God doesn't protect me, I'm lost, so to speak. And that's why you can have experiences of victimization in the 12th house, where you feel defenseless. And you can have people with Mars in the 12th house that can, you know, go through experiences of being bullied at school. Other kids picking on them and they feel overpowered. You can feel overpowered. Now, not only by larger forces, but by nature and simply by people who take over you. Now, if we take the example of Mars in the 12th, one of the things you're going to ask is, so what do I do? How do I develop myself? What's the purpose? From an evolutionary point of view, we need to understand why. You know, in astrology, we can see, oh, Mars in the 12th means public, you know, hidden enemies and self-undoing and desire for spiritual development. But my question is, all these definitions, why do I feel like that? Why do I attract hidden enemies? Because if I understand the why, I can direct my energy more productively. Coming from the perspective that nothing is random. I'm not born with Mars in the 12th house because that's where it happened to be. No, there's an evolutionary intention. If I get it, I can navigate it better. So Mars in the 12th can initially be innocent, where there's no impulse to fight, where there's no feeling of danger. And some people with Mars in the 12th can be very reckless because of that. You know, they're going to see someone with a coronavirus, they're going to go and hug them because I'm going to be fine. The universe is good. So there's no initial defense and protection mechanism until I lose my innocence. And then people bully me at school. Now, what's the issue also with the 12th house is because you lose yourself, this can be underdeveloped. So as a Mars in the 12th, you may feel like you don't know what you want. You don't know what to do. you don't have that impulse to take action. And when you don't, then you attract people who do it for you. If you don't assert your needs, then you're going to be at the mercy of other people's needs. If you don't have goals, people are going to have you support their goals. So what happens is that you end up serving everybody else and not knowing, what do I really want? What is really, how is that serving me? You know, you don't initially ask that question. The same thing with the moon in the 12th house. The moon is our sense of family and security. So what's in the innocence? The moon in the 12th feel like everybody's family. That cat, I totally feel that I can relate. So there's a sense of universality with the moon in the 12th. I don't just connect with my biological family. I connect with with a greater collective family. And that's why you can have people with the 12th house moon who can have a lot of compassion, because they know that this animal feels pain and this animal needs food just like I do. I dissolve my differences. I don't see ourselves as separate. I can relate. What's in the loss of innocence? That because I relate to the whole, I don't know what my needs are. What are my needs? I don't know with a 12th house moon. And therefore it's as if I don't have needs. And a typical 12, Pisces moon person is someone who can feel they're fine. They don't have problems. There's some kind of positive, adaptive, it's all good approach. But what ends up happening is that on the longer run, they become neglected. Quite often, 12th house moon people can have parents that are either overwhelmed or parents that have to work a lot and are not always physically available. And what happens is that the child naturally sacrifices their own needs because there's a reason. Mommy's busy, or mommy is not available, and she has her own cup to take care of. So there's a lot of surrendering of my own emotional needs and nurturing, until I realize that this gets to a point where I become a victim, where I become overwhelmed by everybody's needs. And this person calls me in the middle of the night, and that person calls me in, and I already adopted 30 cats. Like, where is this going to end? I cannot feed the whole world. And yet, that's what a 12th house moon can feel, is that they are the world. Michael Jackson had a Pisces moon on, I think, either on the ascendant or the 12th house, and like, we are the world and heal the world and all the children of the world. Like, he was very universal with his Piscean self, and that's why he touched so many people. So I won't go into all the stages because that will take many hours, but you can refer back to the book, the Neptune 12th house book, and you'll see every planet in the 12th house, what that means, and every sign and how to synthesize that. But I'm giving you just some references so you can you can begin your own research. Don't take what I say for granted. By all means, try it, see if it works for you. This is an illustration of Neptune and Uranus, 12th house, 11th house, where you have super modern versus nature reclaiming itself after humans leave. We have that now with Neptune in Pisces, and now that humans are not active, you see wildlife returning. You see nature reclaiming the places where humans have withdrawn. And that's, again, who's going to have the last word? Nature, in the end, when we're gone, is going to continue without us. Some keywords: forces beyond our control, and these higher forces can be fate, karma, higher spiritual forces. It can be nature, just like the sun, or an earthquake, or a hurricane taking your roof. All these larger elements, the primal forces of nature, the jungle and the deserts and the sea floors and the big waves, and these elements is part of the 12th house as well. But then it also applies to anyone who can overpower you if you don't protect yourself. Because it's a place we don't control, it's a place we need to learn to accept things, whether we accept it consciously or whether we fight it, but need to accept it. Where our ego disappears, and we need to, we have lessons of humility and loss of will. Now, it doesn't mean you need to fight your ego. It simply means you need to put it in the right perspective. You need to produce with your ego. You need your fire. But in the 12th house, the fire, the self, must serve a larger cause. What cannot be owned and what must be shared with everybody. So that's why you can experience losses in the 12th house, because you think you own something, you become attached to it, and then it slips out of your grip. And the lesson is that it never really belonged to you. Let it be. And our professional ability to touch the masses, a career orientation. So in a sense, we're all one. That's when there's no predator and you don't need defenses. But then, do you? There's a saying, not everything that's free is necessarily good for you. So what do you see here? You see deception, you see danger, and you see something that requires some Virgo, critical thinking. Are you naive? Are you indiscriminate? Or 6th house, are you cautious? Are you aware and awake? Are you careful?
Hey, Maurice, this is
Yeah.
Caitlin. This has been so great. Just want to give you a 10-minute heads up to go. We have 10 more minutes.
So I'll just go through some charts and then we will take some questions if there's time. So Mick Jagger, another Mars, Moon, Uranus in the 12th house. And he's what? He's a singer. Music is Taurus. So he was, if you look at his MC, His MC is in Aquarius. And whether you use Saturn or Uranus as the ruler, they're both in Gemini. And you wouldn't see that he's necessarily a musician with Aquarius and Gemini. You'd think he would be a teacher, a scientist. And truth is, his parents were teachers, and they expected him to become a teacher. But he became a musician and a performer and a rock and roll star. And that's what happens with the 12th house, is you can have your own idea of what you think you're going to become, but fate has other plans for you. And so the 12th house is how you're actually going to touch the masses. What is the service that people will respond to? And you see here with Mars, Mars has to do with creativity. You see many, many rock stars with Mars, Neptune and Mars in the 12th. It's not uncommon. And of course, the moon adds to the music and the arts. So, you know, that's something that's also, when you're facing the masses, you're not in control. But he didn't really live according to his 10th house career. He lived according to his Leo, performance, and Taurus. You know, many politicians will have either the Sun or Saturn in the 12th. And again, I am cherry picking here. I'm sorry, you know, it's not a full research, but it's just giving you a glimpse. Now, Biden's story is very, very interesting because he has that Mars, Sun, Venus in the 12th house, and he's been involved in public life for a very long time. He's not hiding anywhere. That's what I'm saying is, in the 12th house, you're actually so exposed that there's nowhere to hide. Everybody's going to know what you're doing because you are everybody. Now, because of that, because it's so, there are no boundaries, you feel overwhelmed and you want to hide. Think about every public figure, how they are trying to protect their privacy, and they're retreating, and they don't want the paparazzi to invade them. But the reason they're retreating is because they are overexposed. And that's a 12th house dynamic. It's from complete exposure to wanting to hide because there's too much light. And you're going to get too much sun, and it's going to burn you. So you need to find some shelter from everything. Now, what happens with Biden, aside from his public career, is all these Scorpio circumstances. You know, he lost his wife and daughter in a car accident. So you see the Scorpio, and Mars in Scorpio in particular, square Pluto, there's a deep loss, rupture, grief that was completely unexpected. What could he do? He couldn't save them. He couldn't be there to change the circumstances. There's something about fate. There's something that, you know, through that loss is so humbling. Death is one of the most humbling things. And then he's lost his son later to cancer a few years ago. So his personal circumstances, you know, there was a lot of tragedy in his life. And yet the positive side of that 12th house was that, you know, he could affect global dynamics. And he's not the only one. I mean, look at Obama's chart with Saturn and Jupiter in the 12th. Is that the lawyer? He was a lawyer before president. Is that a political career? 12th house, Saturn, Jupiter. He has nothing in the 10th. Scorpio in the 10th, which is, wanting to make changes. But you see, the rulers of Scorpio, Mars and Pluto, are both in Virgo in the 7th and 8th house. If I were to rely on that, I would say he's a good psychologist. He's a good analyst. But that's not a political career, Virgo and Scorpio. That's the political career. And that's because the 12th house relates to what we can inspire, how people resonate with us, message. And that's another example, George Bush, who was born, I believe his family was already involved with politics, earlier on. So he was born into a public family, both Sun and Saturn in the 12th. And he was probably, as a kid, overwhelmed because the expectations were high. And his father was this big shot that he never saw. There's a sense of, where is my father? My father belongs to everybody, but it doesn't belong to me. You don't own what's in the 12th house. So you don't own Saturn, which means your daddy's not your daddy, is everybody's daddy. And there's a sense that you can't really fully grasp it. You can't fully own it. And he became himself a public figure, elected to office and re-elected when he and his Saturn return in the 12th house. So many other politicians with those signatures, because you need Neptune and 12th house to have that kind of public role. So let's see if you have some questions.
Okay, we have about 2 minutes, so
Okay.
let's see. I'll just pick one. Okay, how do we integrate the 12th house / Neptune / Pisces archetype in a natal chart to another house? For example, if the cusp of Pisces is on the 1st or 9th house.
Well, the easy way, is to make some correlation on an archetypal point of view. So if you have Pisces in your 1st house, which is that house of individuality and birthing and self, then the self must serve something larger. What you're birthing in your 1st house will not just be for yourself, but it will be for a larger collective. So this is why people with Pisces rising, one of the big lessons they realize that there's a lot of letting go, that they can't control everything in their lives. That they need to improvise and adapt to circumstances rather than pre-plan them. And the same way, if Pisces is in your 7th house, then it's going to, the same approach will apply to relationships. The same way if Venus is in your 12th house. Commonly, Venus in the 12th, you'll see many people who don't manage their own finances very well, because Venus rules Taurus and finances. But they will often be involved with public funds, with treasury. And ironically, what's in the 12th house, you can do well for others, whereas you're not always very good at doing it for yourself. Okay?
Great, thank you so much. So we're about out of time now. So I just want to thank you for this thorough presentation and remind everyone that if you're interested in learning more about this topic, Maurice has his book, if you want to show it here. And then if you'd like to book a personal one-on-one session to really dive deeply into your chart, you can check out his website in order to book a consultation. And then as another exciting piece, again, he's joined our faculty and is teaching in the fall a 10-week course on evolutionary astrology. I want to thank everyone for your donations as well, and thank you, Maurice, for donating your time today.
Thank you. And just a quick note on the course for the fall is we're going to really go through the principles, how to interpret the chart from an evolutionary point of view to understand not just diagnostics, not just what a particular placement means, but what are the intentions? What are the larger causes, the reasons why certain things happen a certain way? So I hope this inspires you, and thank you, Kepler College. Thank you for offering this space and for being there.
Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your weekend. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.